Kane, the canned intro again. So Todd has spent over a decade creating a management framework that has resulted in massive value for the companies he has worked with. Millions in high margin projects, operations, millions in saved cash, reducing employee turnover, and massive increases in team morale. Todd has led groups for several high growth companies like Encana, Canadian Natural Resources Limited, WestJet, Bell Canada, Longview Systems, and Fully Managed. His work has been recognized with numerous awards, both technical and business, by Microsoft, Small Business BC, Globe and Mail, and Venture Magazine. Todd, really happy that you are joining us, and we really look forward to your insights.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation to be here as well. And hopefully deliver some value here. Definitely agile aligned and focusing largely on the service management side of business. So what I'm going to be talking about today largely centers around the importance of the role of the service manager. And this is a crucial role in any MSP, because as you guys can probably appreciate, if the service doesn't work, everything else kind of doesn't matter after the fact. So this is a really crucial role, and I take this both from a perspective of the service manager as a particular person sometimes in the organization, if you're kind of scaling out. Otherwise, it's probably the owner or some other person that is at least wearing this hat from a service management standpoint. And I kind of take it from both of those angles as well. So universally applies depending on the size and scale of your team at this point. So first off, as Stephen said, some of you may be familiar with me, some of you may not. So I'll give you kind of the quick and dirty on who am I and what do I know about service management. So my journey, started as a tech, as a lot of people in this industry do. And I was a technician, accidentally built my first consulting company before I graduated high school. I was the neighborhood nerd that supported everyone's home PCs, and eventually they asked me to help with their computer and networks at their offices. So kind of fell my way into this consulting thing, and I was wearing a tie to school and going to clients after school and sort of building my skills that way. And over time, this grew. I essentially got acqui-hired by a consulting group in Western Canada and went through this insane growth phase where we were hiring 20 to 30 people a week, which is an absolute breakneck pace by any comparison. And we had to figure a lot of things out, especially in how you grow and scale a business that is adding people that quickly. And there was two things that we really had to solve for: is how do you skill up new leaders in order to apply leadership to the teams as they were scaling? And also, how do you do that without polluting the culture? So that was what I consider sort of my crash course MBA in business and leadership, and in sort of working with this organization to develop this management framework. And it was a really, really awesome, very formative time in my career, and learned an absolute ton. So it sort of took these skills and applied them in other instances. Did a turnaround for Bell Canada. Their professional services division of Western Canada was just bleeding money all over the place, and I managed to stand them back up and got them into the black. And also, people may recognize Fully Managed. For those that you don't, sort of a well-recognized MSP in Western Canada, and took them from post-merger hangover to double-digit growth, tripling revenue, doubling headcount, reducing client or staff turnover. So a really great experience there. And then what I sort of realized in reflecting on all these experiences is that the things that I was doing in each of these organizations was not really unique. There was sort of isms of each company that I worked in, but what I was doing was fairly universal. So I decided to go back to my consulting roots and start a consulting organization for MSPs and for IT service providers, really to take this toolkit and these systems that I found were working fairly universally and apply them on a one-to-many basis rather than a one-to-one. So I'll kind of run through that experience and some of the sort of the primary tent poles of that framework as well, and apply it for you guys in sort of a light form to give you some scaffolding to potentially take on and apply both in your leadership as well as the leadership in your organization for team members as well. So I mentioned the role of service manager. It is not just a title. It is a role in the organization. Someone needs to be responsible for the service delivery of the organization. If you're a smaller IT shop, that's often ends up being a hat that you wear. But like finance, it's one of the first hats that needs to be delegated because it's also an incredibly noisy part of the business, and it tends to draw you back away from the more strategic activities of the business. So however you're kind of managing this role, it is a hat that someone wears in the organization, either as their sort of core responsibility or as a large portion of their other responsibilities. So as an owner, you originally have kind of these 8 hats that are all stacked on top. And this is one of those early hats that you need to give up and not unceremoniously dump onto somebody else, but really set them up for success. So I talked a bit about why this is. And top IT service organizations ranked sort of their importance of certain things in an organization, and network infrastructure is first, which kind of makes sense because if the network doesn't work, no packets are flowing, not a lot of work gets done. So if the network is down, everyone's sitting on their hands, that's a problem. So core infrastructure, network infrastructure being really crucial. But second is service desk. And the reason why is like, if something's broken, how quickly, how efficiently does it get fixed? And the service desk is the primary point of interface for users with IT. So the experience that you create for those users in those interactions is their understanding of the IT support organization, whether that's in-house or in most cases, in our case, that we're an external third party, but we're still basically the IT department. So what is their experience in their interaction with you as a partner or just exclusively as the IT side of the business, right? So mentioned this before as well. This is what I sort of describe as the service pyramid, base layer being service delivery. You have to get this right, because if you try to go to a TBR, QBR with a client and you want to talk about some projects that they should be doing or some long-term planning that they should do, you're potentially trying to fold them into some type of sale or an evergreen program. And all they want to talk about is the ticket that they've had open for 2 weeks and it can't get solved. Then, you're stuck. You cannot get past that. So as I mentioned, if the service end of the business is not working, nothing else really matters because the client will not be in the space to engage you at that level. So it's really, really crucial. And then sort of second from there, project management is a great place to start because once service is kind of dialed in, you can start to sell some projects, set people up on a technology roadmap and start to push them through this cycle, this 3 to 5 year cycle of managing their technology spend and their technology application in their business. And once you get some projects sold, then you can kind of apply that more broadly in an account management strategy, and then you can flip that from an internal view to an external view and start doing some business development and bring on some new business. The importance of this is that it's layered, right? So if you get these things out of sequence, if you're trying to build the BD side of the business when you've not gotten service dialed in or project management dialed in, you're compounding the issues that may exist in the organization. So getting these right in sequences is also really, really important. And if you get this right, then you'll have low churn and high efficiency, essentially, right? So the current state for a lot of people is firefighting much, right? It's so funny how much we talk in this industry about us being proactive and doing a lot of the things that we could and should be doing. And this is often a value differentiation for people in a sales capacity is, those other guys, they're just waiting for stuff to fall down and they'll fix it when it's broken. We're proactive. And, there's a little sort of asterisk next to that is if we have time. So the firefighting is really what keeps us from getting into that proactive position and being able to address the needs of the organizations that we support coherently. Because, a lot of organizations are just fighting the tsunami of tickets every day. And unless you can get in front of that and start resolving some of the root cause issues, it really doesn't allow you to be providing the type of service that ideally you want to be able to confidently say that you deliver, right? It does make sense as well because there is a lot to manage, right? Especially that service manager hat. There are so many conflicting priorities and different streams of the business that they're responsible for. Obviously, you're managing ticket queues. You're probably doing some type of project management. There's a lot of questions from staff. There's client escalations. And, if you're not the owner, there's pressure from your boss. And sometimes there's some AM work even, right? So all of these things need to get done through the day-to-day and the week-to-week. And it is a lot to manage. It is not an easy role, but it is crucial. So this is kind of an image of what people tend to think of, what they aspire to be as a service manager in their organization. But quite frankly, it often ends up, it just looks like this. You're swamped, you're working late hours, and the team is starting to feel the pressure. So this is the unfortunate reality that a lot of people in that service manager role end up sort of feeling. And Scott mentioned earlier, service manager burnout, it is real, right? Because the ability to sort of manage these multiple streams and feel some level of confidence around what you're actually delivering is contingent on how much you can actually accomplish. And given sort of the volume of and the urgency of the work that we face every day, it can be slippery. So first and foremost, if this feels familiar to you, this is not your fault, right? Like, we are not set up for a lot of success in this role. As I kind of mentioned, the service manager is often promoted as a senior level tech, and the owner will say, "Hey, you're pretty good at what you do. How about you take on this role, and you can help everyone else to do the same thing." And that's the extent of it, right? Like, you've been promoted to service manager, and that's really not the best way to think about it. Like, really, becoming a service manager is a career change. It is not a promotion, because all the things that made you successful as an individual contributor on a technical level have very little application as a service manager. And in a lot of cases, the service manager that gets promoted from this role ends up defaulting back to the things that they feel they have some level of control over. So if you're an owner that is promoted as service manager who ends up doing a lot of tickets, and in a lot of cases, they end up doing the most tickets, that's not what you want, right? But there's a quote from a Greek philosopher, Archilochus, and it says, "We don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training." So this is really where we end up is, I have some ideas of what I could and should be doing, but, I suffer from the tyranny of now. All of this stuff continues to show up, and I'm not sure how to manage this. And it just feels really, really hard, right? So vision without execution is hallucination, from Thomas Edison. And this is really to underline the fact that strategic planning is crucial in order to get this role right, because we have to understand what exactly are we trying to accomplish and how are we actually going to be able to do that. Because, as I said, like, one of the difficulties of this role is competing priorities. And so much of management is priority management, because what may show up and be shiny and distracting and noisy may not be the thing that you actually need to focus on. So development of a strategic plan first is really, really important, because this helps everyone to clearly understand what are we actually trying to accomplish here, and therefore, how should we be spending our energy? And that allows you to develop what I refer to as an execution plan, where we have the strategic plan that often gets written, then it gets stuffed in a desk somewhere, and then 3 months from now we take a look at it and say, how did we do? Well, we did terribly, because no one really focused on this. We didn't have an idea of how we took this strategy and actually implemented it on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. So that is really where sort of this agile execution comes in. Is we have a strategic plan, but it can't be so rigid that it locks us into what we should be doing and forces us to do certain things that we maybe don't feel provide a lot of value either to us and to the client base. So coming up with a strategy and an execution plan that are sort of give you enough framework to work off of, but also flexible enough to give you the capability to pivot around these things and to be able to manage things based on what you're seeing on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. So it informs the plan rather than wrecking it whenever those problems start to creep up, right? So as a service manager, it's a bit of a mini MBA in a lot of ways, right? You're responsible for the HR portion of the business. There's resource management and figuring out how to apply the people resources that you have. There's a lot of problem solving, both technical in some cases, but more on the people side, including kind of those client escalations and dealing with upset customers or frustrations within your team about what you can and can't do as an organization. There's a lot of workflow design. There's the general management of the team and the client base, and then hopefully to some extent you have some insight or responsibility around profit and loss. So this becomes sort of this inroad into understanding all the components of the business and how they fit together and how you can potentially influence and orchestrate that with leadership. So it is hard, but it also is an incredible learning opportunity. And I think the point of this is really that you do need to be agile. If there was a service management framework that allowed you to sort of take these things and understand them in context and to be able to sort of deal with the volume and the complexity of the work that you had, that's ideal, right? Because we're not talking about things that have sort of a static influence. Like every day looks slightly different in an MSP. You're not facing sort of the same routine. If you're internal IT for a standard organization, it's still busy. There's still a lot of end user service work to be done, but the complexity of dealing with 150 independent companies is very different than dealing with one company. So the ability to be flexible and understand these things in context and give you enough of a framework that you understand how to apply them and how to rank and sort certain tasks and initiatives becomes really crucial here. So what should you be focusing on as a service manager? And this is sort of a great start to, we've talked about sort of how we should be viewing our responsibilities. We should be developing an execution plan that maps against that the most important crucial piece here is, and I kind of touched on it earlier, is don't bury yourself in the work, right? If you're a service manager that feels like, oh, the team is really busy, I'll pitch in, and that becomes your everyday, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. It feels tempting because, as I said, psychologically, people will revert back to what they feel they can affect and what they're more comfortable with. So if you are a technical person being promoted into management, it's very tempting to fall back into the technical role. But that's not where your energy is best spent. Your time needs to be spent on supporting and developing the team that you're responsible for. That is the crucial role of a service manager, is your success is defined by the success of your team, not your individual contributions. And that's how you want to really understand your role differently. So first step in this kind of roadmap around how you do this as a successful service manager is clearly defining responsibilities. So you want to be as specific as possible in defining objective KPIs, okay? So this helps you to focus on what's important. This starts with sort of a broader strategy of what are we trying to accomplish? And then we develop the lead and lag indicators around those objectives. So a lead indicator is something that tells you about the progress towards a goal, and a lag indicator tells you how you did in retrospect. And the difficulty is we often think about lag indicators, but we don't necessarily think of lead indicators, okay? So a couple of examples of this is we want to focus on top line revenue growth. So we look at number of contracts sold, number of projects sold, number of products sold, and what's the revenue associated with that. You can only reflect on that. So you can't say, how are we doing? Well, we've sold X towards our goal. Good. We're either on track or off track, but get to the end of the quarter. What happened? Don't know. Like, did we hit that goal? Yes or no? Do we understand really why? Maybe. And that where you need some lead indicators is how many proposals were sent on a week-to-week basis, and how many of those do we typically win? Therefore, what is our predicted lag indicator around our revenue growth? Same thing from a ticket and service support aspect, right? So how many tickets did we close this week? It's 100 short of what we expected and we think we're capable of doing. Why is that? Doesn't really matter at this point. Like, you can figure that stuff out, but you can't correct it either, right? In looking at reflecting on the past. Whereas if you say, In order to close 150 tickets this week, each person needs to contribute towards that and close X number of tickets. And if everyone is underperforming, you're not going to hit that goal, right? And being able to support the individual contributors that are missing the metrics that they're responsible for is both an objective measure of their performance. And as long as you take this in a coaching capacity and not, breathing down their neck and breathing fire, then that can really help extend the team and again, kind of refocus people on an hour by hour basis rather than just sort of reflective at the end of the week on whether or not it's a pass fail and how well you did. Okay. Another big piece of this is management by expectation, management by exception. Management by exception is really crucial for a service manager and generally any type of business leader because there is so much noise. It is impossible for you to understand in entirety what is happening inside the business. So if you're trying to, as a service manager, to review all tickets before you actually close them out in the two-step close, for example, that is not a scalable practice. Are you going to be able to physically review 400 tickets a day when you get to be a much bigger MSP? Absolutely not. So what should you be focusing on? You need to understand what are some of those KPIs that give you the high level view of this and allow you to look for exceptions to what you expect. Because if the KPIs are being hit and everything's green, perfect. You can focus your energy on other things. But if they start to turn yellow, they start to turn red, then those are the exceptions that you need to swoop into and understand who's responsible for that KPI. What are the questions I need to ask of those people around what we need to do to start to shift those things back to where I need to see them. Okay. So second step is start coaching. So if things are off track, what is the plan? How regularly do you meet with your staff? And this is an important piece to sort of this agile idea around this management framework is moving at the speed of your business. So one of the primary things that I recommend for managers is a weekly one-on-one. And a lot of managers will push back on weekly saying, that's too much. Either the sort of number one pushback is, well, I've got so many staff. How could I possibly meet with all of them once a week? Can I do this once a month instead? And the answer is, unfortunately, not really, because if you have too many people, your team is too big and you're not an effective manager. Any team past kind of 8 or 10 people is a law of diminishing returns on how effectively you're going to be managing your staff. So you need to break up the team, atomize, increase your leadership capacity in order to make those teams a more manageable size. And the other half of this is this idea of moving at the speed of your business. So if things are off track, if someone's underperforming, things are not going as well in the service or the project side of the business as you would hope. If you're meeting with them on a monthly basis, that's a long period of time for things to be off track or uncorrected. And ideally, maybe you want to be working in a daily capacity with people if that is the speed at which you're trying to move. But in general, most things can be caught, managed, and sort of curtailed on a week-to-week basis. And that's really what we're looking for here. The primary role of a one-on-one is to build a trusting and open relationship with your staff so that there's increased communication. The quality of the communication is better, but also this coaching capacity on a week-to-week basis, once you've built that base level of trust, allows you to have a greater deal of influence to move these people in the right direction and to have them focus on the right things so that collectively you can achieve the goals of the organization. So build a plan for coaching, start checking in regularly, start running one-on-ones on a weekly basis. Okay. The second piece, and this really spawns out of those one-on-ones, is finding intrinsic motivation. And you see this from a lot of sort of junior managers or owners that don't have sort of a ton of experience with people leadership, is they want to look for, how do I motivate my team? How do I keep them accountable? And a lot of things that they do are not wrong, but they're limited in their scope and impact. And what a lot of people default to is performance-based bonuses. And I've seen a ton of owners and a ton of managers that get really frustrated when the team doesn't seem to respond to these things as they would expect. And in general, I can say a lot of people, I would say the majority, if not a huge majority of techs, don't really respond well to fiscal incentives, right? They're doing mental calculus around what these incentives look like. So if you say, there's a $500 bonus this month for someone that does X, Y, and Z, someone may reach for that ring, but you can't expect everyone to start crawling over each other to try and achieve that. Like, it's just the techs tend to not be motivated by money. I describe this as being coin operated. And your salespeople in a lot of cases are generally going to be coin operated. Your techs are not. And looking for different ways to motivate them is crucial. The best way that you can motivate someone is understanding what drives them intrinsically. Because if that motivation comes from inside them and they're judging their performance against their own standards and what they hope to achieve personally, that is a much stronger influence than you will ever be able to create with some external factor. But it does require you understanding their psychology, what drives them, what they're interested in, and how you can influence those external factors to create intrinsic motivation. So this is a bit of a heady topic. It's tricky, and it requires a lot of practice and some sort of psychological understanding of individuals, because it will not be uniform. What motivates someone will not be the same thing that motivates another. And what motivates you is probably not what motivates all the people on your team, for certain. So really understanding this on an individual level is really, really crucial in order to get the maximum performance out of people, because it has to be fueled by them internally. So the other piece is accountability. This is a question I get a lot from leaders, is how do I hold my team accountable? And this is different than making them accountable, which is often what people are thinking when they ask this question. And I would say the agile approach to this is it requires some encouragement and experimentation, right? And the accountability comes from that intrinsic motivation, that if you get this right, that they will be driven towards that accountability and you can hold them accountable. So there are ways that this does work, and you can create an accountability culture, which we'll get into in a second here. But the really important piece to this is, again, this is not something that you create externally. If you're having difficulty with accountability, one of the first things I would suggest you look at is your own accountability. So are you running kind of flavor of the month management, where you're just sort of dropping things in randomly, telling people to do a certain thing, and then you stop asking about them 2 weeks later? That is usually one of the first issues around this, is you're not holding yourself accountable to the things that you expect and that you should be doing. And you're generally not holding an expectation of accountability, and you're letting people slide on things that either you've not communicated as an expectation, or even if you have, they're not held as a long-term expectation, and they tend to ebb and flow. And that creates a lot of baseline behavior where people will just contribute enough to not get in trouble, but they're really not extending their capability either. Okay. So the easiest way to understand this is accountability equals performance. And this is really where the management hits, the rubber hits the road here. So this is based on recent Gallup survey data analysis. Managers are responsible for 70% of staff engagement. Okay, so you guys have heard this expression that people quit managers, they don't quit companies. And this is almost universally true. There's some exceptions to this, but the management behaviors and the management practices and how well supported a person feels in their role is a 70% of their willingness to engage and stay at a company. Okay, so if you think about this in context, all the things that people want to try to do outside of just the basic mechanics of managing your team are absolutely working in the margins. They will not even contribute even half of what you would hope that they contribute towards that staff engagement. So it's really easy to say, if we could do this, and I'll set up these workflows to alert this person to do such and such. And this is not that these things are bad, but they're really focusing on those low energy contributions. Like it's the 2% contribution towards getting those people to engage and work at the capacity they're capable of. So this is a big part of why I'm I deeply believe in the role of the manager in most organizations, and that it's generally underserved. That this should be kind of the hallmark of what you want your organization to be good at, because this is how you will get the most from the people in your team. Okay, so a graphic to represent this. This is sort of a difference of what makes a highly engaged employee. So you've got sort of the baseline performer who guys just kind of phoning it in on the right here, and the highly engaged employees that is your A player and is potentially really killing it on the left. And I won't go through all of these, but if you just sort of quickly scan through what makes an active and engaged employee, if you read through this, almost all of it comes from management. Okay, it's do I feel like my manager cares? Someone asked me about how I'm doing? Do I feel motivated and given some challenges in my role? All of those things are going to be things that are prescribed or at least managed for that individual contributor by their manager. So this is what creates an active, engaged, and an efficient and effective individual contributor is their manager, and that's the crucial role of this role in any organization. And what it can actually contribute towards the team performance is categorically across the board the highest amount of energy that will affect this. Okay. Also, performance is a team game. And your team's performance will be determined by its weakest member. Okay, so this goes to sort of my favorite expression about company culture. And my favorite expression on company culture is defined by what you tolerate, right? And this goes to exactly this, that at most organizations through their history and potentially currently have that senior member of the team who's a bit gruff. They're very smart, they're very capable, but they seem to be immune to all the rest of the rules that everyone else has to follow. They don't document, they don't enter their time, they're kind of pissy and a bit unapproachable, but they know where the bodies are buried, and when the stuff hits the fan around this particular line of business application for this important client, they seem to be the only person that can fix it. And we end up tolerating a lot of the behaviors in the team that don't contribute towards a positive culture. And that is a problem because everyone else starts to notice that either subconsciously or actively. And they will start to think to themselves like, why do I enter my time? Because, Steve over in the corner, he seems to get away with it and he doesn't. So maybe I can take a break and no one will notice, right? The things that you start to tolerate become the artifacts of your team's culture. So I really want to challenge people to understand what are the things that you're tolerating that you don't really like in your organization that contribute negatively to the culture. And those are things that you really need to start to rip out. And in some cases, it requires, some sacrificial chickens to be fired. And trust me, it's not as bad as you think. No one is irreplaceable. It will be difficult until that tribal knowledge is transitioned or picked up from other people. But in almost all cases in where there's this troublesome cultural component in an organization, when that person either quits or gets fired, the rest of the team breathes a sigh of relief and comes to you and says, woof, that sure took a long time. What took so long, right? And I'm sure many of you can throw this in chat, you probably had that experience where you finally let someone go because you just couldn't tolerate it anymore. It wasn't as bad as you expected. You made a mountain of a molehill with this, and the rest of the team quietly celebrated the fact that they were no longer there. So don't fear this as much as you made up in your head. It's probably going to be a good thing, and it certainly contributes towards a positive culture that you hope to have in your team in the future. The other piece of this is high performers love data. Okay, so the people that are hiding from the data and the measurement that you want to create around people, those are the people that probably have something to hide. And high performance teams love that measurement because it helps to validate the things that they're doing well, right? They want these objective artifacts to be able to underline what they think they're great at, right? Those are the people you really, really want to rally around and celebrate in your organization. And if people are accountable to this, then that's a huge lock for accountability in your team, unlock for accountability in your team and for delegation. Because once you can sort of confidently hand the stuff off to somebody else and you know that it gets done, there is a culture of accountability that's embedded in your team, then it's a lot easier to delegate things and be more confident about the work that you're handing off to somebody else. So that becomes really, really crucial. So again, measurement is important, and how you're measuring in an objective fashion for things that people have some level of control over, right? They have to have an overlap of sphere of influence on those KPIs, And if the high performers glob onto this and use it as a reference for the great work that they're doing, that is the contribution towards a performance culture. So if you have people that are pushing back against the data and the measurement and giving you a lot of excuses, approach it in a coaching fashion, be empathetic about that, but don't tolerate it for long periods of time. If you've spent 3 weeks clearing out all of the excuses and roadblocks for why a certain person can't achieve that goal, yet they've agreed that that should be the goal, problematic. Maybe you need to have some harder conversations, right? Quick aside, generally you want to focus on your A and B players, right? So if you're spending a lot of your time on your D players around sort of the difficulties in measurement and their lack of ability to meet expectations that you have agreed upon for them, that is not a great spend of your energy as a manager. In general, you can usually only move people up one level. So if you're focusing on a D player and putting a ton of energy into them on a week-to-week basis, you might get them to a C, which is, to some extent is a win, but they're still a C player. Whereas if you don't focus that same energy on an A, they may quit. Okay, so you want to focus your energy very much on the A players and significantly on the B players, because if you can move those B players to an A, you're killing it, and the team will rally around that and do much better. So just a quick aside around sort of how you focus your managerial energy through the week, and it should be focused on the high contributors in your team. Okay. So a quick summary here. Define your execution plan, right? So you may have a strategy, pull it out from that desk, make sure that you understand how you're influencing that strategy on a week-to-week basis. Know your KPIs and talk about them on a week-to-week basis with your team. What are we trying to achieve? What should we be focusing on? What are we falling short around? What do we think we can do about that? These should be active conversations, right? Because we don't just set that plan and assume that it's all going to work out like gravy. We have to have an agile approach to this and understanding what is happening on a day-to-day basis. How does that influence our plan? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to change things? Do we need to apply more resources here or less resources here? The only way that you can do that is managing by exception and knowing your KPIs. Okay. In order to do that, you absolutely need to communicate your expectations. And managers are generally terrible about this. They have a certain expectation in their head. They feel like they've told the staff, but they've never actually really communicated those expectations to the people, yet they hold them to those standards. And that's really, really unfair. You can't get mad at someone for not meeting the goals that you've never explicitly communicated to them. That is just not a good way to approach this. Okay, so generally you want to be a coach and be supportive with your team, right? So how can I serve you as a manager? That's a great way to understand this in kind of an inverted hierarchy chart, right? So customers at the bottom, everyone rolls up. How am I serving the person below me? Even as the owner of the organization, how am I serving the managers? That's not being subservient. It's just understanding what can I do to help you to contribute towards your success. That's your role as a manager. Okay. And then the sort of the baseline to this is build an agile performance culture, right? So we want to be flexible. We want to be adaptable. We don't hold on to, the way that we did things. We want to be able to understand what is needed right now and how do we judge that based on sort of our cultural landmarks, what we're ultimately trying to achieve, and how my contributions, both as a manager and an individual contributor, will contribute towards those annual and quarterly goals. What do I need to focus on this week? What do I need to focus on today in order to achieve those and help the team be successful? All right. So that is it from me. So thanks everybody for being in attendance and joining us today for some excellent learning and being agile in our approach to our businesses. If you want to learn a little bit more about me, you can scan the QR code here or go to evolvedmgmt.com and check out some info on my website. I've got a blog post on all of these topics: leadership, technology, the MSP approach, all of that stuff. I've also got a podcast and some training material. One in particular, very germane to this presentation, is a service manager training. So if you have either a growing service leader that you want to transition to a service manager, or someone that is taking on that hat, or just you as an owner want to be better at service management, that would be an excellent place to start, is a service management course. It kind of acts as the missing manual for the role, because a lot of us end up in that role and don't really have a lot of experience or training to draw upon. So that's really why I created that course. So appreciate everyone's time. And I think we have a little time for Q&A. So not a ton of time, but happy to take some questions if we have time for that, Stephen.
Yeah, amazing, Todd. Thanks so much for your insight and experience on that. And so, excuse me. Yeah, like Todd said, everyone, if you have a question, throw it in the chat, and I'll happily pass that on. While you're thinking, maybe Todd, I was keeping some notes on some of the things that you were saying, and so maybe you made the comment about, we need to ask questions like, what are we trying to accomplish, and where should we spend our energy? Should that answer to the question of what are we trying to accomplish? Should that be the same for all of us, or are we going to come up with different answers? And I'm talking about like the service manager role.
Yeah, I think it's different for each organization, because it's one of the things I say that's really interesting about our industry is like, we're all generally doing the same kind of work, right? It's IT service for multiple organizations. It's enablement of technology, usually mostly revolving around the Microsoft stack. There's some cloud pieces there. We're reacting to end users. The interesting part is none of us do it the same way, right? Like I see this in my travels, kind of working with multiple organizations, is we're all sort of doing the same business, but none of us do it the exact same way. So everyone's circumstance will be a little bit different. There's sort of this sort of a maturity framework that I apply on, how are you doing certain things within sort of each component of the business? And some people, they may have service dialed in, right? Like service is not an issue. Our SLAs are great. Our CSAT is high. The team doesn't feel really stressed out. If that's great and good, then you can focus more on sort of the project side of the business or development of new business if you've really kind of dialed things in. But most people, generally, it's best to start with service because, as I said, that's sort of that baseline component. But everyone's circumstance and what they should be focusing on will be slightly unique. I do like focusing on SLAs and KPIs because they are objective. They don't necessarily lie to us, but the caveat is they don't give us good answers. They just help us ask better questions. So what that is useful for is the systems and the data tell us this. And if I, as a manager or a business owner, don't agree with that, then you need to work that in reverse, right? And there's some great sort of lean framework that you can apply to this. The 5 whys, right, is a great one. Fishbone exercise. I use these a lot in sort of understanding a deeper understanding of why these things are problematic. Because the first answer, reflexive answer, will not be what the answer is. A good example is, we need more people to do more work. Is that true? Right? Like it depends. So everyone's circumstance is going to be slightly different, but the best way to sort of get to those answers of what should you be asking, what should you be focusing on, is understanding yourself in context with some of those KPIs and using some general benchmarks to understand what's possible, where are we now, therefore what's our plan to get there.
Nice, brilliant. And then I've got one more here, Todd. I don't see any questions populating the chat, but I'll just go ahead and ask this one last question. You talked a little bit about meetings and the importance of managers and one-on-ones weekly. Do you have any data or insight because we all have different sized organizations here, and do you have any data or insight into what the ideal number on a team is so that a manager who's engaged in these one-on-ones doesn't get overloaded, him or herself? Do you have any data that says here's an ideal size of a team?
Yeah. There's lots of data that points to this. You guys can just Google around for. In fact, I have a blog post called the 2 Pizza Team, and this is an idea popularized by Jeff Bezos. If you can't feed your team with 2 medium pizzas, it's too big. And the ideal size of a team is 6 to 8 people. And then if you are growing past 10 people, then it becomes just a downward spiral of efficiency and effectiveness in managing those teams. And the best way to think about this is actually a visualization. So if you think about this as sort of yourself at the center, and then you put a dot around you for all of the people that you manage, and then draw a line to yourself and then to everyone else in the team. So in 6 people, kind of looks like a pentagram, and then like gets a little more into sort of like hexagons and like more complex geometry. But if you have like 10 or 12 people, there's just lines all over the place, right? And you think of it in scaling complexity, because it's not just the relationships between you and the directs. It's actually the relationships between everyone else on the team and people that have dealt with sort of these traditional HR issues of the infighting between team members, or your ability to spend the appropriate amount of time with that person to understand the intrinsic motivations and the differences between each one. That is way too much work to do with 20 people. And reasonably, you don't have 30 minutes a week to spend with 20 people. You would be doing that all day. So 6 to 8 people is enough, where you're basically spending 10% of your week in one-on-ones, which is a very, very reasonable amount of time to focus on the most crucial resource in your organization, which is people.
Got it, Todd. Yeah, really, really good insight there. And I confess, when you said the word pizza, I started to tune out. And so I had to really zero in and concentrate on what you were saying, because all I had was a picture of big pepperoni. Anyways, there is another question here. Wim asks here, it's a brilliant question. How should the service manager's manager, so the operations manager, COO, whatever that next highest level up, how should that person promote a good tech to a service manager without burning them out?
Yeah. So I'll say this is a twofold answer as to sort of things you want to consider. Is one, make sure that they understand what a manager's job is. I think that's one of the most crucial things here. In our organizations, a lot of people will often sort of glob onto the idea of, well, if I want more money or I want more responsibility, I guess I have to go into management. And they're not really keen on it, but they just see that as the only path for upward trajectory in the organization. And that is not true, right? There's some truth to it, but like really understanding, do you want to remain technical and go towards sort of the CTO or CIO type role, or at least sort of technical architect within the organization, work on like deep projects and doing some of that scoping, and there is room for that in our business? Or do you want to go the business route and work with people and problems, right? Like those are management responsibilities. And I personally love that stuff. Like I love being a COO, because it allows you to sort of dip your fingers in all the parts of the business and really kind of spend time and energy in the areas that you want to through the course of the week. But that's not for everybody. So really explaining to them, like, look, you're going to be faced with a lot of problems. This is mostly a troubleshooting with a process and people side of things, and doesn't have a lot to do with technology. So are you good with that? Is that the direction you want to take your career? And one of the best ways to do that is especially if you're facing the situation where your teams are too big and you need to look for some future leaders to develop, is just tap them as team leads. You actually don't need to change their pay scale. You can, if you want, just as a sort of a thanks and a contribution for what they're doing, and recognizing them as a future leader. But it's really just an adapted approach to their role, where they're potentially acting as a liaison for the team. They're responsible for the management of the KPIs and maybe the training paths of the people in your team. So you give them basically 10%, 20% of the responsibilities in management, and work with them actively. This is the part that I think is missing in most organizations to support people in their career growth, is collaboration, right? Like you share the responsibilities with them for a period of time. And that feels sort of redundant and unnecessary, but that's how they're going to gain confidence, and they're going to understand how you do things. And then they'll be able to take on those responsibilities, and you can shed them so that you can spend more time on strategic aspects of the business. If to just dump this on them and say, well, they're not very good at it, I'm going to take it back, right? Well, that's not very effective for anybody. It's going to be deflating for them. It's frustrating for you as a leader, because it feels like you can't sort of delegate any of these responsibilities, and you start to build it up in your head that like they're just not good at this stuff. And that's not true. They just don't know how to do it. Like spend the time with them, focus on it, and help them to develop that skill set. And then as they start to rise in both their independence and their capability of taking on more of these responsibilities, just start layering on more until they've gotten to that point where they've taken on 80% of your role as a manager for that team. And then, you can start to look at promoting them, right?
Yeah, love it. Love it, Todd. Well, Todd, again, thank you very much for your great presentation, great insights.